I'm Scott. I design, build, and repair woodworking pieces. I'm opening up the doors to my shop to help you become a better woodworker. Whether you're working on a home improvement project or doing something in your workshop, cutting large boards can be a challenge. The easiest way to deal with this is to use your local home improvement store to have them make the cuts on their large panel saw, but sometimes that's not practical. I'm going to show you the different ways you can use a circular saw to cut large boards accurately and consistently. A circular saw is typically one of the first tools that people buy when they're getting into woodworking. This is a relatively inexpensive tool for cutting straight lines. I'm going to show you the simplest cut first, and that's cutting a long board shorter, but getting an accurate cut on it. To make an accurate cut across a large board like this, you need to use a square. I've just got my small tri-square here, but you could use a speed square as well. Lining that up there is a standard process for cutting large boards. But there's an easier way to do this, because here I have to adjust where this is, and then I have to visually line up where that blade is. If you make a small jig like this, and this edge here is where your cutting is, all you need to do is pay attention to where that is in the pencil line, and then run your saw across. Now this jig here has a long fence on it, so I've got lots to line up on before I even start the cut, and lots to finish with. This saw guide I've used for years, and it's showing a little bit of wear. I've had brother-in-laws use it, I've had friends use it. It's really gotten a lot of use. Making a saw guide is simple but very worthwhile. You need 2 straight pieces of wood and a piece of paneling. Underneath, it's just a matter of first of all securing that front edge, and then the second step is to make sure that you've got your second fence at 90 degrees, and then you can secure that. Just make sure you've got enough room here that there's wood overhanging, and that your first cut on that saw is going to cut that edge. That gives you a predictable edge that every single time you cut with that saw, it's going to be flush. With the easiest cut out of the way, let's move on to something more challenging. How about cutting across a piece of plywood? What I used to do is mark on the plywood where I wanted my cut, and then I'd have to do some math to figure out where to secure my straight edge. I'd have to back it up here so I could run it against the saw. What I would do is look at the bottom of the saw, expose the blade, and measure the distance between the edge of the blade and the edge of the base plate. I take that distance and then subtract it from my measurement to figure out where I needed to secure something. A lot of math and figuring out for a cut. There is a better way. This is a straight edge jig that I use for cutting across plywood. This has got a bottom just like the jig I showed you, and it's also got a straight edge here. And if you're looking for the longest straight edge you can get, the best thing to use is the outside edge of plywood. That's called the factory edge, and there's typically writing on it. That's the straightest edge you're going to get on a board. So I just secure that factory straight edge on the board here, and I've got excess on this side that gets cut off by the saw on that very first cut, and I've got excess on this side that allows me to clamp out here. The motor of the saw runs across this part here, so clamping on it can be a problem and get in the way. When making a long cut like this, just make sure your wood is propped up properly, and it's not going to move once those 2 boards are cut apart. A typical chop saw will cut 6 or 8 inches. A sliding saw will usually cut 12. But what do you do if you've got a board longer than that? Well, I've flipped these over before, cut one side, then flip them over, cut another, but it doesn't give you a straight line. I'll show you what I mean by that. I don't get a perfectly straight line, and I get some blowout on the grain, so it's not optimal for making cuts. A benchtop panel saw is the best solution for this. You really need a quality blade installed in your circular saw to make sure that this operation is going to work well. Once you've got that set up, what you need to do is look at the base of this to understand the plate that you've got to work with, so that we can make the benchtop panel saw with a channel in the middle. The first thing I do is glue down one edge. This is my straight edge here. So I just apply glue across here and make sure I've got enough glue it's going to stay in place, and then nail it. Normally I would brush this out, making sure I've got a lot of consistent glue, but this is just a jig. So what I'm going to do is put it on here, just move it a little bit, distribute the glue around, and then we're just going to nail it in place. I'm going to leave a bit of a spacer here for a piece that comes on later, but really I'm just using 3/4 inch finishing nails just to tack this in place. And it doesn't need to be dead accurate in terms of where you're going. I just flush it up to the edge over here to get it in place. With this fresh cut here, the saw blade will always run against this as long as it's pushed up against this fence. So what I'm going to do now is build another fence on this side and force the saw to run through a channel, and that way my cuts will always be flush to this edge. To put this piece in here, I want a bit of a space to be able to see where I'm cutting. So I'm going to put in a spacer block as I assemble this, just to give me about 3/4 of an inch to be able to see inside where my cut line is. And what I'm going to do is attach both this piece and this piece together with a block at either end. That way I've got a solid fixture that nothing's going to move around on me, and then I can put the fence on. With these ends on, I've now got one solid piece. And when I put the saw in here, you can see how this is going to work. I've got my saw blade running across here as long as it's against that fence. So the last piece is to put this in here to create a channel and force it in there. Now that I have this channel established, I need to put a 90-degree fence underneath. But to do that, I need to figure out where it should start. So I slide this all the way to the back. I set my blade depth as deep as I think I would cut, which is probably 1.5 inches. And that shows me where this blade is protruding at the front, which is where I need to install my fence. So here's the fence that's going on the line. It's going to go about here. And then I take a framing square to make sure that I've got this absolutely square to that line where the saw is going to cut. I'm going to drive in one screw here and one on the other end, test it out before I put in the final screws. So it's all assembled and ready for a test cut. I'll show you how it works. If I put my piece of wood down here and line this up on the front edge, this should give me a square line here. Now I've got one more problem. If I cut all the way through this piece of wood, I'm now cutting into the table or the surface I'm using. So I need to put down what's called a sacrificial piece of wood, and that is so I can cut a little bit deeper than this board into something to make sure I cut all the way through. I've taken a piece of plywood here and added it to the front here. So this will go on the flat surface of the table. This is on the front edge. And then I've got a spot back here. I've got about 1/4 inch of lip. And this is actually called a bench hook. So it goes on a workbench or a table like this. And what it does is it provides a surface to be able to push against. So if I take the piece of wood that I want to cut here, this is the edge here that I want to cut. And then we take this a benchtop panel saw. So I put this piece on the edge here, and this is where I want to cut. Now all the pressure is going on this board this direction. This jig is pushing this direction. So as long as I hold right here and push this way, all of this is locked together, and I can run my saw across the top here. Checking it with a square, the cut turned out perfect. I'm just adding in the last few screws to lock this in. So this benchtop panel saw is all set to go. I just finished building this box, and I cut the boards using this benchtop panel saw. I'm hoping this gives you an idea of how you can use your circular saw to cut those large, awkward boards in an accurate way. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed with the link below yet, please do. The more subscribers we get, the more we're going to produce. And if you have subscribed, click on the bell below, and you'll be notified as soon as we release a video. Thanks for watching.